Hello and welcome to this edition of AGRI-NEWS for July. Today, again, we're going to be talking with John Grimes, our guest here. And this for July, John, we're going to get right into it. What are the things going on in the farming world today for beef? What's our outlook? What's the weather like?
Well, it's been good basically since we got the crop in the ground. It was a challenge getting the crop in the ground. It was fairly wet, and depending on when you got started, how warm it was. But as a whole, I think most crops have received adequate rainfall, at least in our part of the state. I think there's some challenges in the north of northern Ohio. But all in all, you drive around southern Ohio, crops look fairly good. Things are green. We've had more than enough moisture. In a couple cases, it's gotten too much moisture, but I think most farmers would take that scenario before it's too dry.
Right,
and,
right. I think it's not too wet yet.
Yeah, it sounds like the three bears syndrome we're talking about. They're too hot, too cold.
Too cold, yeah.
It's never just right.
It's never, and it never is just right for farmers very often.
Well, we're pretty picky.
So, yeah, we are, and but we'll take what we've got right now pretty good. I think.
We're not going to change it.
No.
As much as we complain.
We can't change it, you're right.
So I think we've got a map of the country that we can show that this is, USDA puts this map out weekly. If you go to Google U.S. Drought Monitor, this map and website will come up. And it's interesting. You can really go over the years and see how it's changed across the country. But this is a snapshot on July 4th, July 4th, early last week. And if you notice, basically where it's white, it's good. There's nothing really abnormal going on as far as precipitation or drought level. You look at the upper Midwest, eastern Montana, North Dakota, part of South Dakota, that's getting into the extreme drought category. I've talked to some producers up in that part of the world, and there's actually some beef producers that are having to sell off animals. They don't have enough grass. They don't have enough water. So that kind of situation's happened in different parts of the country. Now, fortunately, in the last 5 to 10 years, we haven't been faced with anything like that in Ohio.
Right.
But in 2011, the red that you see in the upper Midwest, Texas and Oklahoma were basically all red. And those are two of the very biggest cattle states. Now, Montana's got a lot of cattle, too, and the Dakotas do as well. So one big change over the last year to two is California had been in the grips of a drought, pretty significant drought. If you notice, most of California is in pretty good shape. So basically, to summarize what we're looking at here, the eastern corn belt, or at least the central to eastern corn belt, is really good. And I think that there are some spots that stands are uneven, either from too much moisture or planted when it was too wet. But as a whole, based on what I've read on grain price outlook, it looks like we have a chance for a very good crop. Maybe not historically high, but very good. So I think that's a reflection of a lot of things. I think, farmers have got equipment now that if they get the right conditions, they can plant a lot of crop very fast and get it sprayed in a timely fashion. So where we're at now, corn is, I've seen some corn pollinating, or you'll see corn tasseling, and that'll go on for the rest of the month. Soybeans are quite a bit farther behind. They won't reproduce or pollinate till probably another 2 to 4 weeks, I would say, on the early side, and then we'll move towards harvest. So that's kind of where we're at, and I think as a beef producer making hay, it's been a little bit of a challenge because we haven't had just consecutive days of dry weather, and
nice warm weather
to cure the hay. So. I think we've got a scene of a pasture here that kind of reflects what I would say is pretty typical look around Ohio, southern Ohio at this time. Trees are nice and green, and the pastures are fairly lush, and that's kind of, to me, it looks like a late afternoon, early evening shot. That's kind of a peaceful looking setting. That's as a beef producer, you kind of like to see that. This time of year, what's going on as far as the average beef producer is. I think this is a picture of some heifers, and hopefully they have been bred or are soon to be bred. Beef cattle have a 283-day gestation, and if we bred a cow around this time of year, you're looking at mid-late April for a calf next year. So depending on your calving season, some folks have had breeding season going on for quite a while, and Others are getting going, and so it's a challenge with warm weather. The hotter it gets, the harder it is to get animals bred. It's just that if you notice in pastures, you'll see cows standing in woods or standing in water holes or ponds. When it gets hotter, they're kind of like you and I. We like to be comfortable.
We'd like to be comfortable, a little cooler than standing out there in the sun all day.
Especially,
I'm sure that isn't comfortable.
You and I usually don't wear black shirts in summer, and so dark-colored animals will tend to stay in shade longer than lighter-colored animals for the same reasons.
Yeah.
So you don't always think of that, but it's white or yellow or blonde-colored animals would tend to graze during the middle of the day more than dark-colored animals.
They'll stay toward the edge of the woods or whatever they can.
Right. And that scene we had, you saw a really nicely managed pasture. You didn't see a lot of weeds. This is the time of year we worry about some of that. You see a pasture that looks to me like it might have been mowed, taking the seed heads off of the grass. And you see how the animals have got their head down grazing. When we have lots of weed, that aggravates their eyes.
Right, yeah.
You get
with that stuff.
Seed heads and dust and things like that. And we worry about flies this time of year. When it gets hotter, usually you'll see animals switching their tail or swatting their head to try to fight flies. Now, there are products that farmers can use to knock back flies and control them, but probably the thing we worry about with the eyes is pink eye. Cattle do get pink eye, and it's a cloudy look. It's not terribly different than what humans get.
It's kind of almost like
it's an aggravation, and if you're not treated properly, you can have some permanent scarring. So it behooves the farmer to watch the eyes this time of year, whether it's from weed control or fly control. I think that's very important. I've seen the effects of negligence and what that can do to a long-term production.
Now, how often should a person mow down their pasture?
Oh, it's not like your yard. It can be costly because fuel's not cheap and all that. But it's a little bit what your schedule and what the growth allows you. You think about your yard. We've had plenty of moisture, enough temperature. I'd say most people are mowing their yard at least once a week or maybe every fifth or sixth day.
Yeah.
You don't do it quite the way. I mean, you see the cows are out there eating it, but what happens if a grass is allowed to get tall enough that it gets a seed head?
Right.
They don't like it. It's mature. It doesn't taste good to them. So if it gets away from you, so to speak, it's like, okay, if your lawn gets away from you, what do? You have to rake it.
Yeah, you got to pick
well,
that stuff
if the
up,
pasture growth gets away from you and you get seed heads, you're probably going to have to clip it. So it just depends is the right answer.
Yeah.
And I would say do it a minimal amount to keep your costs down. But and with some farms in this part of the state, depends on the terrain. Some of this ground's a little steeper. I don't like to get on any more than I have to. But so judgment calls is basically what it is.
And if you do have good pasture, what's about the thickness of your grass you should try to keep? Now I know you try to alternate, or if you've got a big enough pasture where you can divide it in half and move them, alternate them around. So what would be a good height that you should turn them into, and when should you take them out of that?
Well, this is a little vague, but what the old rule was take half, leave half. You don't want to eat it into the ground, but I would say at the minimum, when a pasture is pretty well harvested, you better have at least 3 or 4 inches of stubble or growth. You don't want it look like a tabletop. So
right, you don't want it down to a couple
because
of inches.
When you eat it down to the growing point, it takes a while for it to regenerate itself. So pasture management is very important, and maybe this year we can, I don't want to use the term abuse, but maybe we can be more aggressive because it's got plenty of moisture. It should bounce back. But if it's a dry year, you want to be extra cautious.
And you shouldn't. Should you put any fertilizer on that, or
actually,
obviously you maybe take soil samples or anything like that?
Soil samples. That's the old extension rule. We want everything soil sampled, but I would say at least in permanent pastures, we ought to sample them every 2 or 3 years. Not necessarily every year like a corn or soybean field, but for most forages, pH is critical. So whether you want to put lime on. You asked about fertilizer. Think about your yard.
Yeah.
As fast as it grows in April and May, if if you fertilize, it's really going to get away from you. It grows so fast. Think about how often you mow your yard in April, May versus June, July. When it gets hot, it slows down. But a good practice, and I know some of my predecessors back in the day sure promoted this. I remember my younger days with the extension is late summer you can put a little extra fertilizer on to get a boost for the fall before we get into winter. So the old time tested rule, 50 units of nitrogen or 50 actual units of nitrogen per acre will get you, if you apply that, say, late July, early August, it'll create some extra grazing in October, November before we get into winter. So it's a good way to minimize having to feed hay.
Okay, so, great.
I think we've got a picture of a show scene. This is county fair season.
Right.
I think I forget the second county, but I know Pickaway County is usually the first one
that's
south
early.
of Columbus, and there's another county in northwest, I think, Ohio, that's about the same time. But this is a scene that you'll see at the county fair, a proud family and a judge and a champion animal that obviously the family's proud of, and there's a lot of work. And I think for the non-farm folks who go to a fair, they always like to go watch a show and see what's going on, and they really don't have a really good idea unless you've been involved in 4-H or FFA and had family involved with this. And this is cattle, but there's also sheep and pork and chickens and rabbits. There's all kinds of animal projects, and the thing that we see at most county fairs a big deal is the sale.
Yep.
And I do want to commend. There's lots of counties where businesses really step up and support the kids.
Yeah, you're right. They do. Absolutely.
And so I guess what I wanted to kind of signify with this picture is, we're in the season for this. State Fair comes up at the end of July. I think it officially starts, I want to say, like the 24th or 5th, and it goes for about 10 days. And a lot of people like to go to that. But the counties in our kind of extension area down here, they're just kind of getting going. July will be a lot of them in August, and they kind of wind up in September. There's a couple in October around the state. But what this is showing is, we have a judge at these shows that will evaluate the animals, and the kids will get ribbons and trophies based on what the judge thinks of their project. And a lot of these are long term. The bigger the animal, whether it's a beef or a dairy cow, and then you get down to pigs and sheep, they're not quite as long a project far as from start to finish. And so these kids have worked hard on them, and I hope, really what I want them to be is good ambassadors, talk to the public. If somebody comes to the barn and asks the question, okay, how do you raise a cow or whatever, be able to tell them a little bit about what they go through. But this is live animal evaluation, but, last month we talked about some marketing issues for beef. So we have a public to please here is the judge. The judge is going to tell us what they think of the animal. Off the fair or in the grocery store, we worry about the consumer. What's the consumer think of what we're doing? And last month we talked about, for the first time since 2003, exports are going to start to China. Well, since we last visited, they have actually exported the first pounds of beef to China.
Well, I'm gonna stop you right there just a second, John, and we're going to take a real quick break, and we're going to come back to that. And I've got a couple other questions about fair before we go on to that beef real quick, if that's all right.
Yep.
So we'll be right back. Hey, we're back on AGRI-NEWS. I've got John Grimes, Duane Rigsby here. John, we were talking about fair.
Yeah.
So, and I know you're the beef specialist. So I'm going to ask us a couple of questions about that related to the fair. Obviously, we've got 4-H'ers, and everybody wants, what should a 4-H'er look for in a beef or in a steer as they get ready for a fair? What if these youngsters? What are they looking for? What should as a judge, if you were a judge, what would you be looking for?
Well, I think, as a judge, and I do judge shows,
right? That's
you have to be aware what the market is wanting now.
Right.
So size of the animal, like a steer. The picture we had earlier was a heifer. It was a breeding animal. But a market steer, basically, you're looking at the amount of muscle they have, the shape of their muscle, and degree of finish. And when I say finish, if you watch a show, you'll see a judge kind of take his hands and rub over the side of the animal. They're trying to get an idea of how much fat is under the hide. And that's the thing about a show is it's a little bit of a old school evaluation. You're doing it with your eye. We have so many more tools now to evaluate animals. We have DNA tests. We have ultrasound, so we can get some measurements before they're harvested. But basically, if you look at an animal, I would tell you to envision a cracker box, long, square, thick. I'm talking about an animal size deal, but you want some width of body. And actually, where those valuable steaks come from is up in their back. And you think about it, there's basically three prime areas. You've got the shoulder, forward, you've got the midsection, and then you got from their hip bones back is what they call the rump. The front and the back do the motion.
Right.
And so therefore muscles will get a little thicker and tougher. The tender tissues is the back because all it does is support.
Right.
It doesn't do any motion. It just holds the skeleton in place. So when I judge, I'm looking about how thick are they down their back. And to give you another visual example is you kind of get trained to know what shape is muscle and what shape is fat.
Okay.
Now you and I probably relate to the heavier condition
quite well,
side.
Yeah, absolutely.
But think about a weightlifter. What's their biceps and muscles? They're round. They have shape. You look at a sumo wrestler.
Much different.
Much different.
But it could be just as powerful.
But there's also a little more white meat instead of red meat.
Right. Yep.
So that'd be an analogy. That would be the extremes of the scale.
Gotcha.
And the art of it is it's a little bit like football players. When Urban Meyer recruits players, he's trying to speculate how they're going to develop. Well, when a kid picks out a 4-H project, they're looking at a small animal trying to project what it's going to be like as a finished product. So there's a little bit of an art to it, and you have to understand biology and how animals grow and mature. But today we're looking at a market animal probably from 13 to 1,450 pounds. Hogs and sheep all have their criteria. I believe hogs are probably more in the 270 to 300 pounds. A market lamb may weigh 130, 140 pounds. So as a judge or as a family picking out projects, you have to understand what the industry wants.
Right.
You can like something, but if the industry doesn't like it,
everybody else then.
You're probably not going to do so well.
Right.
So, there's lots of ways to learn. Extension does a lot of programs and clinics to try to educate folks. There's lots of good farmers and producers out there that families can go talk and learn and have relationships with and try to help them out. Now, probably the projects you see at the fair, most of them will be market animals for food purposes. Like the animal we had pictured earlier, that was a breeding animal. That family will take that animal back in a herd and try to raise animals. So if I'm judging that animal, I'm going to look at maybe more longevity type things. How sound are they on their feet and legs? How do they move? I do look at body, but on females, they don't. It's kind of like looking at guys versus girls. You don't have to have a female look like a weightlifter, so to speak. So you want some femininity and straightness of lines. You still want that silhouette I talked about, but just kind of the gender differences you would see. But that young lady's hopefully going to raise her next 4-H project with that animal.
With me, yeah.
So,
and one last question about that before we move on, because I know time's limited. The old saying, or every time that it just seems like it's natural that a black cow wins, or a black steer wins. Is there anything to a black red cow?
Well,
steer?
Part of it's odds. If you drive around the countryside, you see more black cattle, and part of that's driven by the market. And you're leading me to the consumer side of it. Angus cattle or black-hided animals traditionally have been considered more carcass-oriented or beef quality-oriented. And we talked earlier about the marbling and the steaks. Now, there's lots of breeds that let you get a black hide, and a lot of the cattle you see in the countryside may be part Angus, but they may be crossbred. Okay. So, a little bit of it's tradition, what we expect to be, and that's why I'm saying now we have more tools to identify those cattle. But I would say if you go to weekly auction market, say at Hillsborough or Gallipolis or one of these markets, black feeder calves will bring more because of this perception that they're higher quality,
better,
meat animals, and almost, well, not all, but most of the major breeds, like the breeds that came over from Europe, like Simmental, Limousin, Gelbvieh, they have black. They have bred up, when they came over here from Europe, they bred them to like Angus cattle, and they got the black gene in them, and so they have black purebred variations of the old traditional colors.
Okay. Yep.
Now there's a few breeds that doesn't work, like Charolais. If you breed an Angus to a Charolais, they're going to be gray.
Yeah.
They're not going to be snow white. They're not going to be coal black.
Right.
They're in their immediate. You breed an Angus to a Hereford, the black is dominant, but the white face is dominant. Right. So you'll see a lot of black ones with white face.
With whiter face, yeah. Makes sense.
But I would say part of it is due to the popularity of the Certified Angus Beef program. To qualify, and we've talked about that before, that logo you'll see on a menu or at a store, they have to be black-hided and they have to make a certain quality grade to be qualified as Certified Angus Beef. And usually to do that, they have to have a fair amount of Angus in them to get that extra marbling. So I'm telling you reasons why you see mostly black. Now, I will tell you a little phenomenon going on with fair animals is because over the years we've had so many black ones, there's some people trying to raise some cattle with bling. If that makes sense, like a little white face,
little color
white
to
on
them,
their belly,
gray
ones, something like that. If you take and I'm telling you psychology here.
Sure.
If you've got 10 animals in a class and there's 8 black ones, if you've got a really nice, different colored one, the judge is going to see it.
Kind of sticks out. Yeah, it just kind of stands out a little bit.
So there's a little bit of that going on in the show part of it. I would not say it's in the commercial production side, but just a little presentation.
Yeah, it's interesting. So now you've got another story about we're talking about beef and stuff like that. There's now been the first beef export sent to China
since 2003. That was when we had Mad Cow, and so we've been out of that market for almost 14 years.
Right.
And so a lot of the beef industry is excited about this, and there's opportunities. Now, I will tell you that there are restrictions. There are certain things they want us to do. It's like I was talking to you about, you have to suit the judge at a show. Well, in the commercial setting, you got to suit the consumer.
Right.
Whether it's a housewife here in the United States or it's our friends in China that want to buy beef. And so what I'm saying to you is if China says they want it done this way, and basically they don't want any extra growth hormones, they want to know where it came from. So an animal that gets exported to China has to be basically identified from birth so we can trace it back to the source where it came from. So they've put on some stipulations what they want, and there are some cattle that qualify for that now, but there's going to be an adjustment period. Okay, so if we want to pursue that market, if you as a beef producer want to raise beef to go to China, you're going to have to jump through some hoops. And that's what I was saying. It's like the consumer. They go to the grocery store. They're trying to decide between chicken, pork, beef.
Right.
Part of it's cost, part of it's taste.
That's true.
There's no question that pork and poultry are cheaper than beef. But there's also plenty of survey data that says beef is the preferred taste.
Exactly.
You don't ever hear somebody say beef tastes like chicken.
No.
So,
you're right.
And you usually don't have to bread it or deep fry it or cover it in sauce to make it taste good.
Exactly. A lot of times it's straight off the grill
just a
or
little
anything
salt
like
and pepper
and you're done.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I tested that theory over the weekend over
it
the
works,
holiday,
doesn't it?
and it worked great. Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess I'm showing my ego here that as a beef producer that we're proud of that, but we still have to give them what they want. So it starts from the pasture scene where we're breeding them, how we take care of them, how we feed them. So it's exciting, that the consumer wants it, but we can't let them down. We got to give them something that they want.
And then we're getting close on time here, John. I know you just started up a new Facebook page.
Yeah.
If you want to give us a little bit about that and what you can find on it.
My coworkers that specialize in beef production, we've got a Facebook page. If you look up or search the OSU Extension or Ohio State University Extension Beef Team, we have a Facebook page, and we put up news articles, videos, timely information, and we just started, so you're kind of walking us through some of this.
We're getting it through there. We're getting everything up.
You've got the B Team address. Yep. You can go there. We have a library, a YouTube page. You've got my contact information there here at Piketon and my cell number, and we'd love to have you out. I'm sure you can go there and find anything beef related you need.
Right, absolutely. Well, John, I appreciate it. Talking with you this time. I look forward to the next time. It's always gives me great information to hear all this stuff. I'm always learning from you guys.
Time flies when we're having fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, for now, I'm Duane. John, we'll see everybody next time.